Okay, here it is. This is a topic. Originally, it was going to be about two things: 30-meter telescope and Native Hawaiian rights. In talking about it, the two are kind of infused together, and it almost doesn't seem fair to Native Hawaiian rights to kind of lump it together with something else. So the original plan was to have it as its own separate discussion. But now that we are entirely online, and me not being an expert at all in anything Native Hawaiian, uh, the topic, I am relegating it to experts, of which I am not one. Um, so, not that I'm an expert about telescopes, but I knew nothing about the topic, just like any of the other topics we've talked about, and I became informed about the topic. If we were in class, we would have a undoubtedly interesting discussion about it, but blame the virus, I guess, is the best thing to talk about. So, I'd made this lecture shortly before we had our last official class, and since then, in the news, actually, a story came out in the newspaper about how this debate is still happening. So I'll kind of update you on something after I talk about these slides. So let's talk about what TMT is. 30-meter telescope. It's a visible light telescope, and the idea is that it's large. It's how big is it? Like, it's so big that it actually has to be 492 mirrors that all merged into one. Sorry, how big is it? So it turns out that it's actually not possible to make a mirror that's larger than 8.4 meters. So a meter is about 6 feet, something like that. So yeah, I would say it's probably pretty tough to make a 48 foot piece of glass and not have any imprecisions in the glass. I think it's that the weight of the glass itself would crack it or something along those lines. But the idea was, okay, if we can't make something more than 8.4 meters, why don't we make it just a little bit under? In other words, let's make it 8 meters. And then let's find some way to combine 492 of these 8-meter pieces all together into a giant mirror. That was the idea in the 1980s. And that it would look something like this. So you have 492 pieces of reflective glass that create a giant mirror that in total is 30 meters wide. Total collection area 655. I obviously stole this picture. It's not. I did not make it. 655 square meters total, which would make the resolution, the clarity of the image coming in, being 12 times sharper than the Hubble Space Telescope. Now the difference there would be Hubble Space Telescope has the advantage of being outside of the atmosphere being something that would tend to reduce the resolution, reduce the clarity. But because this thing is so large, it's actually sharper than something that's outside the atmosphere. So what can it do? Well, because it is so powerful in terms of its light gathering, and because it's on a tall mountain in a space where there's not a lot of light pollution, there's not a lot of atmospheric pollution, and because it is so high in altitude, that it's able to basically see more. You get better observation conditions, and because it is superior to other things offered, basically the government then decides that they want to help fund it. So what do we get here? We have to decide where to place it. And these were these were all the possible places. One of which being Mauna Kea. And in 2009, Mauna Kea was designated as the preferred site And this was based on what was scientifically the best, what was financially the best, and where were the politics within the country, what made it amenable to doing it. It also bears mentioning that the 30-meter telescope, which is called the ELT, an extra large telescope, that the Europeans are also building their own in Chile. And they were building these, because they were building these in Chile, it didn't make a lot of sense if you built the TMT, the 30-meter telescope, also in the southern hemisphere. So you wanted one in the northern hemisphere, one in the southern hemisphere. And so, again, Mauna Kea ended up being the best place to put it. And that was after 2009 was when it was selected as the preferred site. In 2013. The state BLNR then approved the site for its construction. This is where it would be. These are some of the existing telescopes in this area. I've never been here. I've gotten pretty close to it. I was on UH Business that brought me pretty close to it, but never all the way up to the top. I think you need to, like, I don't know, stop like in between or something to adjust your body. Obviously, I'm not going to sit around in the middle of a mountain. The picture is beautiful enough. I don't need to see it. This space, the Mauna Kea Science Reserve, has a special area that's known as the Astronomy Precinct. It was established in 1967. It also turns out to be a space that's also very important to Native Hawaiian culture. So again, just as I kind of said before, from an astronomical standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, it was ideal because you've got dark skies, no light pollution, low humidity, high elevation, good weather. Everything is great in terms of using a visible light telescope. But the idea of this space, the Astronomy Precinct, and its establishment in 1967 is all due to this guy right here. This guy, basically, as we were getting ready to land on the moon, he started looking around for sites for placement of a telescope, and he kind of stumbled upon Mauna Kea as an ideal site. So he pushed and pushed and pushed to get it there. That guy was Gerard Kuper. And what he needed was a space that had low humidity. So low humidity was, again, where Mauna Kea was. And what he did, what Gerard did, is he called up Burns. He called up John Burns to basically build a dirt road to this summit where he was going to build a small telescope. And what happened is that Kuiper, because again there was this large push to put someone on the moon, he tried to get NASA to build a much larger telescope and do housing and other things to build something much, much larger. NASA, though, didn't just do what Kuiper wanted. What they did is NASA made it a competition. And so then a UH faculty member said, "Oh, dude, we'll build a telescope there." So now you've got Kuiper, the guy who had the original idea. And then NASA says, "Okay, we like the idea. We're going to open it up to competition." And then some guy at UH says, "Oh, yeah, we could totally do it too." Now, the guy from UH just wasn't some regular old professor. He was actually pretty well known. He had done work before in California, and he was going to build something that was going to serve both NASA and the university. He was going to use a 2-meter telescope. And surprisingly, UH got the contract, won the contract. So Cooper was pretty pissed. And what ended up happening is that Cooper was so pissed that he basically never came back to Mauna Kea and just instead went to Arizona. And so then you've got Jeffries, this guy from the mainland that ends up working at UH, that's then building all these things on the summit, and they end up building it not on top of the summit, but really near the summit, on top of some cinder cones, because obviously the entire island is volcanic. And basically the state of Hawaii basically builds a road. The building of that road then kind of establishes that space as being taken away from the Native Hawaiians. And so this is right around the time of the Native Hawaiian resurgence that starts to happen in the 1970s. So you've got this kind of confluence of events. I say here it became a free-for-all, but it basically becomes a fuckfest. I don't know how else you describe it. Because then once UH then builds a telescope there, and you've got a road there, and, astronomers are going to talk to each other about why their space is so great, and UH being UH, wanting to get a lot of money, UH starts renting it out, leasing it out. And so then it's like I say, a free-for-all, something where everyone wants to build a telescope in Mauna Kea. So you've got that astronomy precinct where everyone's then building something. And the Bureau of Land and Natural Management then manages that space. And the Board of Regents, UH Board of Regents, likes all the money coming in from just leasing out those facilities. And what you got here is UH trying to make some attempts to respect Native Hawaiian culture by, using some of the money and even some of the space for natural and cultural preservation. And then obviously UH is my employer, but their primary concern is getting as much money as they can from the leases, because they're just fortunate enough to have that great space. So, look at this list. This is a huge list of telescopes. Again, I've never been there, but I don't know. It's probably got to look like... I don't even know what it looks like to see that many telescopes. It's a lot of them. So this is really cool. So there's these pictures that you can see where you get to see what they all look like. So again, here's the road that the state built in the late 60s, early 70s. All this land owned by UH. UH is the leaseholder, so they're collecting lease money from all of these telescopes. Just look at all the shit going on there. Looks beautiful. Probably getting great science, but the land itself is sacred. So so that's a debate, and this is what we would talk about if we actually had class, but that is the debate. What is more important here? Because I'm not really sure what, with some things you can really find a middle ground, but I'm not really sure what the middle ground is here. If you believe in Native Hawaiian rights, the vision of this looks atrocious. And if you love science, you're like, who cares about whose bones are there or what cultural practices were practiced somewhere? We got great science going on. There's really no... as far as I see it, I'm not sure what the middle ground would be. This is my opinion. You're free to have your own, obviously. For UH to say, okay, we're going to get all this money, we're going to have all this land, we'll give you, the Native Hawaiians, this little plot of land because we're not using it anyway. it kind of seems pretty pissy, right? It's like an older sibling giving their younger sibling a toy they never played with or a toy that's broken. Obviously, the Native Hawaiian interest is secondary, despite the fact that Hawaii is in the name of the university itself. And obviously, to tell scientists, get the fuck out of here, you're on sacred land, they'll be pretty upset, and other observatories in the same space will all move, so they'll all move, and then all that money is lost. And at the end of the day, UH is a business, so somehow we have to pay to put the lights on. So I'm not sure, honestly, I mean, that's in my conclusion here is I'm not really sure if there is middle ground, and I think we're just wasting our time by saying that there can be found a middle ground. I think we just have to, got to make a choice. You can't, this is like, being a teenager and having two girlfriends at the same time or two boyfriends at the same time, right? At some point, you got to make a choice of who you're going to date. You got to make a choice here. Now, this is also pretty cool because it gives you an idea of what's being planned here. So here's our 30-meter telescope. It's obviously very big. This is the one I talked about in Chile. Obviously even larger. So these are incredibly large telescopes that are being planned. I've only seen one telescope ever, and it turns out to be the fucking smallest one in Wisconsin, Yerkes Observatory, which was owned by the University of Chicago. And I thought that was big. I saw it when I was a little kid, and I thought it was huge. Turns out to be the smallest. But you can see these are all that kind of arrays of the 8-meter telescopes. So the current ones we have here, the Keck telescope, it's pretty small by comparison. Obviously, Chile's putting in a lot of good things here. You've got the Hubble over here. Sorry, and and you've also got the Subaru telescope over on Mauna Kea. So what does it mean here? So I mean, I just from my experience of trying to learn about this, I am not convinced that many within UH are appreciative of some of the things that are on this slide. I think it's a little bit, how do I put this? Well, obviously, as many of you know, or I'm sure all of you know, I come from the mainland. And so a place like UH does try to hire a lot of people that are from Hawaii, but oftentimes, especially when you get to administrators, they're all coming from the mainland. So, there's kind of an acceptance of the fact they're in Hawaii, and we have to, respect the people that were here before us. I'm not sure that they care as much often enough about what the priority should be. That's, all me. My positive comments about this university are sometimes far and few between. So take this with, this is pretty important what I'm about to say. Actually, it's pretty special that here at West, on the West campus, that we actually have many Native Hawaiians that are in leadership positions here on our campus. I think it makes it a stronger campus. I think it makes it a more authentic campus than even Manoa. So what do we see here? Why is Mauna Kea so sacred? And that's largely because the summit was acting as a temple. A temple not only for Native Hawaiians, but also others in Polynesia. And it becomes a burial ground for those ancestors that are high-ranking. It also becomes a site where even today, not only would you have the relics and the burial of people from the past, but you would also have cultural and religious practices that are still being performed there. So how can you do that if you got a big telescope either on top of the spot you want to use or right next to the spot you want to use while, two scientists are drinking 6-pack of beer in the parking lot and it's right next to someone like burying some bones or, doing something that's culturally significant to them. The two really don't mix. And it's not just one or two places. It's hundreds of culturally significant and archaeological sites all in that same space. And it's not unique to Mauna Kea. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of sites across the islands where, I know enough developers where they all get pissy once the state, archaeologists come in to see things, and they're grumpy about delayed construction. But I think their comments are actually, important. They're relevant because it is the past, and we do need to be respectful of these kinds of things. And so really, all I can kind of say is, Native Hawaiians in this situation are getting screwed. Their land is stolen, and what I say here, the only thing that you might disagree with me with is my statement of their land. I mean, who owns the land? That's really the question. Is it, and that's kind of what we talk about here in the first three bullet points. Whose land is it? Is it the federal government's to assign to someone? Is it the Native Hawaiians who were here before us? Is it the state's land? Who knows? And that's kind of the unfortunate thing about a lot of things in Hawaii, just given how property rights are established here. Essentially, what you see here is that the federal government got the land originally in 1893 when Hawaii was overthrown. The Hawaiian government was overthrown, and then the federal government gave the land to the state for the public trust, and then the state gave it to, basically to UH. Technically, UH leases it from the state and the BLNR, and then the University of Hawaii then subleases that same space to other observatories. And what the Institute for Astronomy gets for that is they get to use the facilities that the other places are building. Basically, UH gets a lot of astronomy without having to actually put up any of the money for it, just basically allowing them to use their land. But Native Hawaiians are like, dude, that was our land. You're just using our land. And that's kind of what we're saying here, is that the Institute for Astronomy is basically neglecting the cultural and religious significance of the sites just to try to get more science done. And there's obviously no monetary compensation or anything for the land being used and not being allocated to Native Hawaiians. Now, what we see here is that, kind of what I'm saying here in the second and third bullet points. You've got shrines then that are culturally significant but are like really close to certain observatories. You've got some that are right by roads. And some Native Hawaiians would say, dude, the whole thing is important. The entire summit is important. You can't just give us little bits of land and say, stay here. And again, obviously I'm not Native Hawaiian, so my passion with this is just about finding something that's right, and me just going off of my own gut instinct of what I think is right in this world. I'm sure I'd be more impassioned about, if I was a scientist, I'd probably be more passionate about science, and if I was Native Hawaiian, I'd probably be more passionate about Native Hawaiian rights just because of that affinity. But in this case, as an outsider who has no preferences in either case, it just seems fair. It just seems right. And if there are other sites where you could do it and they would be just as good or almost just as good, everything does involve some opportunity cost. So you can't just say, I'm only going to build it on Mauna Kea, and if I don't get my way, then the science doesn't get done. Dude, let's just build it in the Canary Islands. And really, most again of the problems here just go back to the fact that Native Hawaiians are not a obviously recognized Native American tribe. So it goes back to the recognition standpoint. It also just goes into how the court system recognizes and supports indigenous rights, which it obviously doesn't do very well. And again, I've just kind of said this here. There isn't a compromise point. So I don't know why we're sitting around and having these meetings saying, let's try to find some common ground here. I just don't think it exists. Obviously, this isn't the only issue where it's like that, right? I mean, I don't think there's really a middle ground for abortion. I don't think there's really a middle ground for, having a right to choose to die if you have a terminal illness. Like, either you do it or you don't. And you feel bad and you feel you want to try to please everybody, but you really can't. So we just kind of need to make one decision or the other. Because if we don't make, obviously I'm kind of siding a little bit more with Native Hawaiians, but if we're going to screw someone over, let's just do it and get it done with. Like, this is just like agonizing. I'm not sure what the solution is. And the other part of the problem of this is it's a pretty complicated topic. It's bound to get everyone all grumpy about things. It's kind of like rail. To really make an informed decision, you would have to learn quite a bit. Just like we didn't do it for rail, and I doubt that we would do it here for a telescope. So this is pretty interesting. So I just want to conclude by showing this. So this is not by the U.S. media. This is by Al Jazeera, which is obviously funded. Is it by Saudi Arabia? I don't remember who funds Al Jazeera. But fun fact, one of the hosts of it is Femi Oke, who was a British weathercaster who I did meet once when I lived in Europe. I'll point her out.
It's about raising the standard of aloha.
Sorry, let me go back here. This is about 25 minutes.
Hi, I'm Femi Oke. And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
That's Femi Oke, who I met.
Will protests help save a sacred summit? We look into the controversy over the proposed construction of a $1 billion telescope on Hawaii's Mauna Kea. And we want to know, what do the Mauna Kea protests mean to you? Share your thoughts with us via Twitter or in our live YouTube chat. Mauna Kea is more than just the tallest mountain in Hawaii. For some Native Hawaiians, the summit represents the realm of the Earth's creator. But pro-business groups and scientists interested in boosting Hawaii's tech industry want Mauna Kea to also house what would be the largest telescope in the Northern Hemisphere. Known as the 13-meter telescope, or TMT, the project has for years drawn criticism because its proposed location is considered to be one of the most sacred sites for Native Hawaiians. For more than 2 weeks, protesters have been blocking construction vehicles from entering the mountain's access road. And on Tuesday, Hawaii's Governor David Ige announced an extended deadline for telescope construction to start before September 2021. Protesters on the mountain call themselves the Kiai, or protectors. They say their current struggle is yet another chapter in a long history of racial discrimination and the denial of indigenous rights by the state. So with us to talk about these issues, and Hilo, Hawaii, Kealoha Pashota, president of Mauna Kea Anaina Ho, or People Who Pray for the Mountain. That is a cultural organization that advocates for the protection of Mauna Kea. In Honolulu, David Kawila Copper is staff attorney with the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation.
Also in Honolulu, Blaze Lovell, a reporter who's been covering the 30-meter telescope story for Honolulu's Civil Beat. And we also reached out to officials in the Hawaii government, as well as representatives from the 30-meter telescope project, to join our program. And they said they were unavailable to comment at this time. So welcome.
Dude, come on. Like, I'm sorry, but come on. Like, yeah. It makes me grumpy when I hear things like that about not having time to do it. It's just a general grumpiness with really anyone in power, I think, where, like, you just need to take a stand. Even if you're, like, I may disagree with what Ige decided on this, but at least the dude showed up. And, he's got to take the heat for it. Same with Caldwell. At least you know how he stands on rail, and at least he promotes it like a carnival worker. I really don't understand why. I mean, yeah, it's Al Jazeera, and maybe you don't want to show up and have a conversation, but I don't think anyone's harmed by having a conversation. I think it's useful to listen to others, and I wish they'd find some like low-level staffer or, I don't know, an intern or someone to have a conversation.
Welcome to the rest of you. I'd like to bring in our community right away and start with this tweet we got from Christopher Chan, who tries to put this all in perspective for those who might be new to this story. Christopher says, the telescope can be built anywhere in the hemisphere with roughly the same meteorological conditions. Why on sacred land? Colonial hubris is what's holding science back, not native people. We're protecting a cultural place and their ancestors. So strong words right there. Kealoha, for you, what do you see these actions on Mauna Kea? Some would call them protests, others would call them protections, but what do they look like for you?
This is Hawaii's version of joining all these global networks that are actually pushing back on the colonial and I'm going to say corporate structure that's happening now, that's suppressing humanity, basically. This is what I think Mauna Kea is about. It's about raising the standard of aloha and kapu aloha, because that is our cultural way, and unleashing the peace from our cultural way.
Kealoha, you are protesting, protecting.
Yes.
Mauna Kea, pretty much every day, but you're not there right now. But what are you there doing? Can you explain? Can you set the scene? Can you describe what would normally be around you and what the aim is?
Well, there's global kia'i. There's kia'i from all the different islands. I'm just a kia'i. We've just been doing it for a really long time. So we're recognized in that way. We've been doing the legal aspects as well on many levels, but basically when it comes down to it, we're all just joining together, staying in kapu aloha, raising the standard of aloha for Hawaii and the world. Every people, indigenous peoples, and everyone's indigenous to somewhere, have a gift to give, and I think aloha is one of our gifts, and it's time for us to unleash that in the world.
Blaze, Kealoha has a very beautiful way of describing what she is doing, but as you as a reporter have to do, exactly what do you see? What is going on? Are people lying in front of construction vehicles? How are you telling this story for your audience?
I mean, as a reporter, we really need to, get both sides, but I think with what the protectors are doing there on the mountain, it's a very peaceful demonstration. It's also a very well organized demonstration. That's one of the points I want to hit, is that they've utilized public relations tools companies, governments would use, but I mean, in my opinion, they're controlling the narrative better than possibly the project and the state government has, in showing how they're demonstrating peacefully.
So on the other side of this debate are people like Peter. Peter here is on Twitter, who says the 30-meter telescope is essential for scientific advancement and discovery. It's not a resort, condos, a tourist trap, strip mall, or anything such as that. It's a research institution. With science under siege around the world, my home state should stand up to defend it. David, you've been involved in at least 3 lawsuits surrounding Mauna Kea. What is at the heart of them? And this point from Peter, is this one of the issues?
Okay, so we got an ad here. That kind of sucks. This kid's got something bigger going on. So, again, I think we'd all do really well just to even just have a conversation like this. I mean, I looked pretty extensively just to learn more about this topic, and this is the only conversation I've seen about this. And again, I wish that there were more views represented in this conversation. And obviously not a lot of people watch Al Jazeera. But it is what it is.
Well, at the heart of all of the legal disputes surrounding Mauna Kea really is this idea that Native Hawaiian culture and rights appear to be foreign in their homeland. And like Peter, views this as a battle of science versus space. But what it really is recognizing that the people from Hawaii, the people who are Hawaii, consider this place to be sacred, and their beliefs are entitled to being held in a high esteem, like science, like everything else. It is not subordinate to this idea that we need to have science and progress. And really it comes down to holding these beliefs, these practices as being important. They're constitutional rights. They should be honored, protected, and not just considered another roadblock to construction.
Can I add in? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Can I just
Yeah, go
add
ahead.
in there? Because, this idea that it's Hawaiians against science is really a canard, and it needs to be addressed here. Because really what this movement is about is raising the indigenous voice. We are indigenous also, and we're First Nation people. And our knowledge, our wisdom that's millennia old is a form of science. And what we're doing here is actually reaching out to science to say,
So that's pretty important there, and I'm guilty of it as well, right? And I'm guilty of it just because, again, of my lack of knowledge in this general area. But her argument, which again I've heard from others, but again I don't know enough about it, would just be, I call them Native Hawaiian practices, rituals. But that would be a way of understanding native science, of which we actually have several faculty, 2 faculty members here, who do practice native science. And again, it's a different way of viewing what science is, but it allows Native Hawaiians in this conversation to say, we don't have to sacrifice one for the other. We just want to practice science differently than through telescopes.
science, we need you to do better, because basically destroying the earth, destroying where we're living isn't the way to go about it. Mauna Kea it contains the biodiversity of Hawaii, because Hawaii is an endangered species capital of the world, and every species is either rare, threatened, and or endangered up there, of plants and animals, also protecting our water. So saying yes to development means we're saying no to all of these things. So I really want to break that canard, because it's really not correct.
I want to show you.
Piggyback off Kealoha.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
I think media also has a role to play in it. I've seen in the national media, the narrative is that this is Native Hawaiians versus science, and maybe to a local extent, local media also have a part to play in this. But I think journalists around the world, especially in Hawaii, need to do a better job.
Here, here, here. This guy's from Civil Beat, which obviously is one of the, here in Hawaii, we're, the media here in Hawaii is Not that great, because if you think about it, you've got the Star Advertiser, big newspaper, suffering just like all other newspapers, and then you've got all the TV stations combined all of their news operations together. That's the Hawaii News Now operation. And it's owned by a company on the mainland. So they probably don't give a fuck about this conversation because all you're going to do is end up pissing people off. And you're not going to get good ratings and sell advertising if you're just going to spend your time pissing people off. Which is probably why it's on Al Jazeera and not on, Joe Moore doing it on, KHON.
Of telling that story, and I think local media has done a better job than national media at breaking that narrative that it isn't just Hawaiians versus science. This is a very complex issue. There's a lot of moving parts, and there's a much more nuance in that simple conflict.
Give us a little example of that nuance then, Blaze. Go ahead.
Well, for example, you could say it's Native Hawaiians versus science, but it's not Native Hawaiians versus science. A lot of the Native Hawaiians on the mountain, on Mauna Kea, aren't opposed to science. A lot aren't opposed to TMT even. Some of them say that it could be moved to Spain and the Canary Islands. A lot of them are scientists themselves. There's also cultural issues at play, issues of heritage. For a lot of the protectors on Mauna Kea, this is just the latest event in a long line of unfortunate events that started with the overthrow of the Hawaiian government, the way the United States came in. It's all these things collating into what TMT has become a symbol for, which is, to many, the oppression of indigenous people.
And that's as true as well. What he's saying there is that, in some sense, TMT 30-meter telescope represents something. And the thing that it represents is this constant dismissal of things that are Hawaiian, and the state suppressing that which is Native Hawaiian. And the U.S. federal government suppressing what is Native Hawaiian.
Blaze, it's so interesting that you mentioned that, and Kealoha also mentioned it, because we got a comment from someone via video who talks about having to choose, being forced to choose because of the way this narrative has come out in media. This is Aurora, a PhD student in Honolulu, and here's her take on it.
I am not involved in direct action on Mauna Kea, but I've been watching, concerned, and have been, through writing, challenging the dehumanizing narrative that resistance to TMT construction on Mauna Kea reflects Hawaiians that are anti-science, backward, obstructionist, which is how it's been portrayed until recently in local media. I have deep concerns over this framing because it's affected not only me and my peers, but also students I've worked with, and forced people to feel as if they have to take sides.
So when it comes to taking sides, Kealoha, you must understand this struggle because you yourself were a telescope systems specialist. You're there consulting. Talk to us about that dichotomy, having to be forced to take sides.
I understand this, and I really appreciate Aurora's mana'o, her philosophy here, and for her to express that struggle. The thing is like I said, it's a canard, this idea that basically the racism in it is, for them, when they called us this in court, they called us backward-looking extremists. Now, those are hotbed words. And the irony is that astronomy itself is based on looking back in time, right? Looking back towards the origin of the universe. When you look back and actually astronomy has the issue to prove that it has modern relevancy, because some of the things we're looking out there are, say, 200 million years light years away. That means it happened to whatever event we're looking at now. The light took 200 million light years to get to us. So that's kind of the dichotomy we're actually looking at. But she's correct in assessing that we're having to defend not only our cultural rights, which should be protected not only by the United States Constitution, even though we challenge U.S. occupation here, but U.S. constitutional provisions as well as state provisions that Kawila was speaking about.
Okay.
These are primacy, supreme rights that should be honored.
David,
I can jump in as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
What gets lost in this narrative is this is an incredibly large, immense structure. It is going to be the tallest on the island and built in a place which both legally and culturally has traditionally been held to be the most important and to have the least amount of development or disturbance. So, people are often pit this, okay, this is science versus culture. I mean, this is about protecting a place that is incredibly sacred. It is, even under the laws, a place that should have very little disturbance, yet we're seeing just a massive structure that can have incredible effects on the environment and the landscape there. And that often gets swept under the rug when we're talking about, okay, this is about science versus Native Hawaiians. That's not what this is about at all.
David, this idea of the land being incredibly sacred, I don't think we can underline this enough, because this is the key to why would you build not just one giant telescope, but multiple telescopes that are already there. So there's obviously a different way of thinking from Native Hawaiians and the way that the government are thinking or the University of Hawaii are thinking. How can you work out that clash, that cultural clash, that understanding as to what this mountain represents and whether there should be even a single telescope there, let alone another one that is being proposed to be built there?
Right. I think it does go back to Native Hawaiian rights and culture being viewed as foreign. I think if this was a normal Western burial site or a church, that I think a lot of people would be able to wrap their minds around it and say, okay, we understand. But it seems like almost a across-the-board reluctance to accept what I would say a large amount of Native Hawaiian people believe to be true and believe to be sacred and important, and they're just being looked at as, well, we don't believe you. And that seems to be what underlines a lot of the legal cases here, where we have to have lawsuits to just say, hey, Native Hawaiians have right to be involved in court process and to be involved in the development and permitting of projects. And there's a history of cases like that had to have been brought because Native Hawaiians are not given a voice when it comes to important decisions.
This is actually a pretty important conversation as well, because if you look here, during this conversation, there are others who are tweeting in, who are adding to this conversation. So again, this is, unfortunately, about the most rigorous conversation I've been able to see about this.
That affect Hawaii.
Blaise, I want to share something with you. This comes from the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commission. I'm going to put up their response to us. This was the statement they sent. We told them we were doing this show. This is the statement they sent. It's huge. But they obviously were very concerned about what was happening in Hawaii. This sentence jumped out at me. Violating the rights of Native Hawaiians in the name of science cannot be justified in any way. They go even further. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples regards these actions, i.e. the building or the attempted building of TMT or Mauna Kea, as discriminatory and racist. That's a UN rapporteur.
So that's pretty significant, what the UN is saying there. That might just be wrong to do that.
But how do Hawaiians and people who live in Hawaii, how are they seeing it? Are they seeing this as racism?
I think Native Hawaiians here, that's one of the things that they're looking at is it could be, as I said, another event in a string of cultural oppression. But I think project leaders in the state, the way they're justifying it is with the possible economic impact that the telescope could bring. Everyone touts that number, $1.4 billion is the total construction amount of the telescope. But with any construction project, you never know what kind of actual economic impact it could have, if it will actually create local jobs and how much dollars it will actually bring into the local economy. That's things reporters here are all trying to figure out. And that's something that we're going to have to wait and see on how it actually pans out.
Why isn't that information readily available? Because this is land that's used by University of Hawaii. It's in the public domain. Am I right in saying that? So why can't you just find that information out?
Can I speak to that for a moment?
Right.
I'm sorry. I just want to correct something. It's actually held in trust by the state for the benefit of Native Hawaiians and the general public. It's it's crowned and what they call ceded lands. And the one thing I wanted to mention about the United Nations aspect is that they don't have the clear and informed consent of the indigenous people of Hawaii. And the colonial activity that they're bringing forward is something that is the United Nations and the world community is trying to eliminate. That's why it's not lawful to maintain that colonial stance. And what we're facing now is a colonial corporate structure that is attacking Mother Earth and trying to dominate that. And we're pushing back along with the many global movements around the world.
I wanted to, picking up on what you're saying there, I wanted to share this comment from a neighborhood organizer in Hawaii who talks about what this means and why it's so important. Have a listen to Ikaika.
We have a core philosophy called Aloha Aina, and it translates as love of land or love of country. And it's what kept us going through the overthrow in 1893. It helped us stop the bombing of Ko'olave. And on the Mauna, at Mauna Kea, it's helped us to build a new community around with free healthcare, free education, free childcare, an abundance of food. And I think it's because people all throughout our community and internationally recognize that Aloha Aina is the alternative. It's the alternative to the capitalism and the forces which are destroying our earth. We need to protect all of these places which we believe are sacred. And I really believe that applies to everywhere.
So David, you heard his viewpoint on why this is sacred, but I want to show you this. This is from someone watching live on YouTube, Jason, who says, the TMT has been settled in court. Now the police are not doing their job.
Look at Bratworm. Bratworm says he actually likes how they're contributing to the conversation. I actually kind of agree. Maybe the atheists are looking for their spaghetti monster god. Yeah, comments are what they are.
Protesting is great and fine, but they are defying the law, they meaning the protesters or protectors. David, where are we right now? Is this comment accurate?
In a sense, but I think it also shows a failure to understand what's really going on. It's one thing to say that a project has a permit and that the state issued that permit for development, but is that really what should happen? Is it the will of the people? And it very clearly is not. Is it the best way to treat and manage these very important and sacred trust lands, which Kealoha is correct by law? They should be preserved and protected for the benefit of Native Hawaiians and the public. And so, just because one body in the government decided to allow for this desecration of state lands does not mean that Native Hawaiians and people who feel passionately otherwise should just be relegated to standing on the side of the road waving signs and while this sacred place gets desecrated. That is not the answer, just because a government agency gave a rubber stamp to this project.
Guess I want to show, if I may, I want to show our audience something that I'm sure you've seen, but they may not have seen. This is an editorial by some of the top executives at TMT, and they wrote this editorial on July the 28th. It was written by the executive director, the observatory scientist, and also the TMT VP for external relations. So basically, three very important people. Something really jumped out at me. So it says right there at the bottom, whether or not TMT is built in Hawaii will not bring closure to it. That to me sounds like Kealoha. We are not going anywhere. We don't care what you protest. We are sticking around. What are you going to do next?
Well, let me just point this out. TMT One of our cases is the failure for TMT to put up the bond, the financial bond, which is required from the 1977 Mauna Kea plan.
I'm going to ask you to keep this simple for us who are just following this as an international audience. So just tell us how that relates.
Thank you.
What are you going to do next?
Well, what we're going to do is maintain our position of nonviolence, kapu aloha, and we are going to continue to stand to protect our sacred mountain. TMT really is lacking a lot of the requirements that they need to actually come through. They don't have enough money to construct at this time.
Right.
That's a huge issue. They also don't have the extended lease. Technically, if they were allowed to build when they got done, after 10 years, they would only have 7 years on their lease for the land. So they're a risk, and we're challenging that. And there's a lot of challenges. Kauila has challenges as well. And we're going to continue to stand, and we're going to continue to move aloha.
And I'd like to add to this. I agree with what Kealoha is saying, and to address TMT's statement directly, which I hear as, hey, we are just one telescope.
Every time I see his big headphones, I'm just like, he should have just got earbuds or something like that, because he just looks incredibly silly with big headphones like a DJ.
This, we're just one issue. Well, that's how things progress in history. It was one sacred site, then 2, then 10. It was the bombing of Koho'olawe, bombing of various areas throughout Hawaii by the military. There are many sacred sites that have been bulldozed and built upon. There are native Hawaiian burial sites that have been dug up and desecrated. And we have this telescope. And you can take one instance and say, okay, this is just happening in one place at one time. But it's the collective effect and really the dehumanizing effect that all of these actions have on the Native Hawaiian people. So I think it is unfair of TMT to say, hey, we understand what you're going through, but we're not it. They are a part of this. And I think right now they are the flagship of it. And it represents the struggle that Indigenous people have to go through throughout history and at all times.
Right. And Blaze, just time for one more comment. I want to bring this in from Kirk on Twitter, who says, Mauna Kea protesters got this one wrong. There is plenty of room for compromise, i.e. build TMT, which is needed, not just for exploration, but safety from space objects, and tear down one of the other two. Facilitate that. Blaze, from the people you've been talking to, will that be enough? Blaze?
Sorry, I lost connection at the end of that.
That's okay.
There,
in just about 30 seconds now, with the people you've been talking to, will tearing down some of the other telescopes be enough to stop this action?
Oh, the protectors there at Mauna Kea made it very clear that they don't intend to move and they will not give way. And even if you tear down a couple more telescopes, TMT, if the project wants it up there, they're going to try to get it up there, and you'll still have a lot more telescopes on Mauna Kea. It wouldn't really change the situation.
Blaze, thank you so much. David, thank you. Kealoha, thank you so much as well, explaining why there have been protests going on for so long about Mauna Kea and a giant telescope that is trying to be built there, but not quite yet. That's all the time we have. Malik and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.
So that's a pretty good conversation about it. The only other updates I would provide about it would be, it was actually in the news this week about the updates about it, is that now the construction cost, which was originally supposed to be $1.4 billion to construct it, has now become $2.4 billion, so $1 billion more expensive. The additional cost, due to a lot of things, just like rail, construction cost, inflation, and the delays. And the astronomers recently met. Every decade they meet to decide what the priorities are going to be. And the Board of Governors of the astronomy community basically disagree. They disagree about whether it should be placed on Mauna Kea or the alternate site, the Canary Islands. And for there to be any movement on this, everyone would have to agree on the Canary Islands. But they don't seem to be agreeing on that. So Mauna Kea is still considered the superior site of where to place this all. But the science could be done elsewhere. And as one of the what we heard during the conversation, the construction of this whole project still takes 10 years. So now it's $2.4 billion in 10 years to build that telescope. Now, again, if we were having the actual class, I'm sure we could have a nice, interesting conversation about this all. Unfortunately, we don't get to have that because of the virus. So I don't think there's anything here. Yeah, there's nothing else here too from this. Okay, so that kind of wraps up our conversation. About the 30-meter telescope, and that gives you something at least to focus your reflection paper on.